There's a subtle moment some people go through that almost never gets talked about. It doesn't appear in chaos, it shows up in stillness, in the quiet gap between conversations, in that strange space where everything feels overwhelming even though nothing is happening. It's the realization that distance feels more comfortable than closeness, not because they reject people in some dramatic, rebellious way, but because being around others feels heavier than it should. It drains their energy, unsettles their thoughts, and sometimes even makes them doubt themselves. And if you've ever hesitated before entering a room full of voices, taken a longer route just to avoid interaction, or felt unexpected pressure from a simple, "How are you? Do it for us," then you already recognize this experience. This isn't hatred. It's something far more complex and rarely spoken about openly. Some people don't dislike others, they dislike who they become around them. They resist the roles they feel pushed into, the unspoken expectations, the constant emotional adjustments. Show this side, hide that one. Soften your truth, reshape your reactions. Every interaction turns into a quiet balancing act between being real and being accepted. And over time, that balancing act becomes exhausting. To really understand this, you have to look deeper than surface level labels. It's too simplistic to call it introversion or social withdrawal. The reality is much more layered. Many of the people who say they don't like people are actually highly perceptive, deeply sensitive, and incredibly thoughtful. It's not people themselves that overwhelm them, it's the emotional effort that comes with engaging. Think about what happens when they enter a crowded space. They don't just see faces, they pick up on tone, body language, subtle tension, shifts in mood. Their mind absorbs everything at once, and that level of awareness can quickly become overwhelming. It's like standing in front of dozens of screens, all playing different scenes at the same time, all demanding attention. Most people don't process the world this way, so they can't fully grasp how exhausting it can feel. Psychology refers to this as emotional overstimulation. It's not a disorder or a flaw, it's heightened sensitivity. People who experience it often need more space, not because they're avoiding others, but because they're trying to stay balanced. Too much emotional input from the outside can destabilize their inner state. So they create distance, not as rejection, but as regulation. But there's another layer beneath this. For some, the distance comes from past experiences where interactions felt confusing or subtly disappointing. Not dramatic trauma, but small, repeated moments that leave a mark. Maybe they learned that conversations often carry hidden meanings, that kindness can be conditional, that words and intentions don't always match, that trust can disappear without warning. Over time, distance starts to feel safer, not isolation, but a buffer, a space where they can exist without feeling judged, misread, or emotionally exposed. Then there's the pressure society places on everyone to be constantly friendly, available, and engaged. For some people, this feels unnatural. They're not energized by surface level interaction or small talk. They're drawn to depth. They want honesty, meaning, conversations that go somewhere real. And because those moments are rare, they often choose solitude over shallow connection. Not because they reject people, but because they value authenticity more than performance. This creates an interesting paradox. Many people who feel this way actually want connection, just not the kind they usually experience. They want conversations without masks, relationships where silence isn't awkward, honesty without fear, closeness without pressure, care without pretending. These kinds of connections do exist, but they're rare. So until they find them, solitude becomes a kind of temporary refuge. Another important layer here is something psychology describes as protective detachment. This happens when someone learns that being open comes with emotional cost. So instead of fully closing off, they build a quiet boundary, not a wall made of anger, but a shield made of awareness. They move carefully through interactions, observing more than engaging. From the outside, they might seem distant or uninterested, but internally, there's constant evaluation. Is this safe? Is this genuine? Will this drain me? If the answer isn't clear, they step back. And over time, stepping back becomes automatic. What makes this even more fascinating is the richness of their inner world. Their thoughts are vivid, their reflections run deep. They process life internally in ways others rarely see. And because that inner space is so full, the outside world doesn't always feel necessary. Their solitude isn't empty, it's alive, filled with ideas, memories, and quiet insight. So, when someone tries to pull them out of that space too abruptly, it feels more like disruption than connection. There's a quiet truth hidden here. Solitude feels safe for those who have learned that being misunderstood hurts more than being alone. And for people who perceive the world deeply, misunderstanding happens often. Their silence gets mistaken for coldness. Their calm gets mistaken for indifference. Their distance gets mistaken for rejection. But in reality, they're often the ones who feel the most. They simply express it differently, quietly, thoughtfully, without needing attention. And here's something important. People like this don't want to stay distant forever. They want closeness, just not the kind that forces them to lose themselves. They want relationships where they can remain authentic without constant adjustment, where silence is comfortable, not awkward, where presence doesn't come with pressure. At their core, they long for emotional freedom, freedom to feel without filtering, to think without performing, to exist without constantly adapting. And because that kind of space is rare, they protect themselves until they find it. Interestingly, this tendency doesn't always come from negative experiences. Some people are simply wired to be inward focused. They process through reflection, not conversation. They recharge in quiet. They create in solitude. For them, social interaction is like visiting a busy city, engaging, even enjoyable for a while, but not somewhere they want to stay. Another key factor is stimulation threshold. Some people thrive in high energy environments because they need strong external input. Others reach their limit quickly. Their thoughts become crowded. Their emotions feel overloaded. They don't need more stimulation. They need less. They need silence the way others need sound, stillness the way others need movement. Asking them to socialize all the time is like expecting someone to run long distances every single day. They could do it, but the emotional cost would slowly wear them down. And even when this begins to make sense, there's still a deeper question underneath it all. Why do some people describe this experience so simply as, I don't like people? Why reduce something so complex to such a broad statement? Because for many, it's easier to simplify than to explain what's really happening inside. It's easier to say, people exhaust me, than to admit, I feel overwhelmed by everything I pick up in every interaction. It's easier to say, I prefer being alone, than to say, I don't know how to stay myself when I'm around others. And sometimes it's easier to say, I don't like people, than to admit, I don't feel safe in spaces where I can't fully be who I am. But here's the quiet truth most people don't see. Those who say they don't like people are often deeply compassionate, not in a loud, visible way, but in a quiet, internal way. They care about fairness, sincerity, and respect more than most. They notice things others ignore. They feel emotional nuances others pass by. Their emotional world runs in high definition. Even when their expression stays calm, their inner experience is intense and active. There's also a strong sense of self awareness in people like this. They reflect on their own reactions. They question why something affected them. They analyze their fears, their habits, their patterns. They don't drift through life unconsciously. They move through it thoughtfully, constantly trying to understand themselves. And sometimes that level of awareness becomes its own kind of overload. There's already so much happening internally that adding too much external input becomes overwhelming. But here's something many people overlook. A lot of individuals who say they don't like people actually feel a deep appreciation for humanity as a whole. They're drawn to human stories, creativity, resilience. They like observing people, understanding behavior, exploring what shapes identity. What they struggle with isn't humanity itself, it's the intensity of close interaction, the emotional demands, the unpredictability of relationships. They love people in theory, they struggle with people in practice, and in a strange way, that makes them incredibly intentional. They don't form connections casually, they don't pretend closeness. If they let someone in, it's because they genuinely feel safe. That's why their circle is small. Not because they reject others, but because they value authenticity so deeply that only a few truly align. And when they do trust someone, something interesting happens. They become exceptional listeners. Their quiet nature makes them attentive. Their introspection makes them empathetic. Their caution makes them gentle. They may not open up to many, but with the few they choose, the connection is real, deep, and meaningful. Still, before they reach that kind of connection, they often carry an internal tension that goes unnoticed. Part of them feels safest alone. Another part quietly longs to be understood. Part of them protects their peace. Another part wishes closeness didn't feel so draining. They live between these two states, balancing solitude and connection like walking a narrow line, trying not to fall too far in either direction. And somewhere deep inside, there's a quiet hope. A hope for a moment, or a person, or a conversation that shifts everything. Something that makes closeness feel lighter, safer, more natural. Something that proves not everyone takes energy. Some people restore it. Not everyone overwhelms. Some people calm. Not everyone confuses. Some people bring clarity. Until they experience that, they hold on to a quiet understanding that disliking people isn't really about people. It's about protection. It's about energy. It's about knowing their limits. It's about guarding the parts of themselves that feel too sensitive to expose carelessly. And if someone could truly see what's happening inside their mind, they would realize something unexpected. These individuals don't distance themselves because they feel too little. They do it because they feel too much. At some point, most people who feel this way reach a moment of reflection. They start to question their distance. Is it a choice or a defense, a preference or a pattern? This realization often comes in quiet moments, late at night, when everything slows down enough for honest thoughts to surface. They begin asking themselves difficult questions. Why does being alone feel so natural? Why does being around others feel so tiring? Why does small talk feel like effort? Why do conversations feel like something to solve rather than enjoy? And for many, the answers are rooted in experiences they rarely talk about. Everyone carries a personal history that shapes how they relate to others. Some learn that opening up leads to being misunderstood. Others learn that expressing needs leads to being ignored. Some were judged for who they were. Others were criticized for being too honest. Over time, these experiences don't explode, they accumulate. Quietly, gradually, until they begin to shape how safe connection feels. Over time, it builds quietly, like water slowly shaping stone. Without noticing it, they begin to link social interaction with discomfort. But discomfort alone doesn't tell the whole story. There's a deeper layer, something more psychological. Some people simply need a different kind of social experience than what the world usually offers. They don't thrive in noise, crowds, or constantly shifting environments. They seek depth instead of volume. They seek authenticity instead of performance. They seek spaces where they don't have to adjust who they are. And because those spaces are rare, they turn inward, not out of resentment, but out of necessity. It's similar to having a very specific diet. They can't consume what everyone else does, not because they dislike it, but because it doesn't sit well with them. In the same way, not every interaction feels right. Some conversations drain them, some create internal tension, some push them into versions of themselves that don't feel natural, so they begin avoiding the emotional equivalent of something unhealthy. And from the outside, this can look like they dislike people. But that's not what's really happening. There's also something distinct about their inner world. Their thoughts are active, reflective, constantly analyzing. They don't just feel emotions, they examine them. They don't just observe behavior, they interpret it. And this ongoing mental processing creates fatigue. When your mind is always working, always reading between the lines, always catching details others miss, being around people becomes mentally demanding. Imagine noticing everything, not by choice, but automatically. A slight shift in tone, a flicker of emotion in someone's eyes, a hesitation, an unspoken expectation. They pick up on subtle inconsistencies that others overlook. And while this makes them incredibly perceptive, It also makes them deeply affected. Nothing passes unnoticed. And because of that, the world can feel heavy. This leads to something psychologists might describe as anticipatory self adjustment. It's when someone prepares for interactions before they even happen. They imagine outcomes, misunderstandings, emotional risks. They mentally rehearse conversations, trying to predict every possible response. By the time the interaction actually happens, they've already spent a significant amount of energy. No surprise that socializing feels exhausting. But here's what often goes unseen. People like this don't want things to feel so heavy. They long for ease. They want relationships where they don't have to pre plan their emotions, where they don't have to filter every word, where they can simply exist as they are. They want people who understand silence, who appreciate depth, who don't require constant adjustment. It's not that they want isolation forever, they just don't want closeness to feel overwhelming. And despite all of this, they develop a quiet kind of strength. They learn how to be alone without feeling lonely, how to support themselves without constant reassurance, how to enjoy their own mind. They build an inner world where they feel understood. And because that space becomes so stable, any connection that enters it must feel meaningful enough to justify the disruption. One of the most misunderstood things about these individuals is this: they rarely dislike people themselves. They dislike the environments people create. They struggle with chaos, with emotional inconsistency, with unpredictability, with situations where meaning is unclear and must be guessed. And often they struggle with who they feel forced to become in those environments. Ironically, they connect best with people who expect nothing from them, people who don't take their quietness personally, who don't interpret distance as rejection, who offer presence instead of pressure. With those people, something shifts. They open naturally, effortlessly, without resistance. Their warmth shows, their humor appears, their intelligence becomes visible, their vulnerability surfaces. The right people don't drain them, they ground them. But reaching that point requires something they don't always give themselves: patience. Patience with their own discomfort, patience with their patterns, patience with how slowly trust builds. Many are so used to relying on themselves that they forget something important. Connection isn't instant. If it doesn't feel safe right away, it doesn't mean it's wrong. Safety isn't immediate, it grows gradually, like a quiet flame, not a sudden spark. And part of their journey involves relearning. Many operate based on old emotional rules formed in the past, rules that once protected them but may no longer apply. Maybe they learned to stay quiet after being misunderstood. Maybe they learned to withdraw after being dismissed. Maybe they learned to hide themselves after being rejected. These patterns keep them safe, but also keep them distant. At some point, they have to ask, do these rules still serve me? And here's something unexpected. Many of these individuals aren't antisocial at all. They are deeply social, just under the right conditions. They value loyalty. They value sincerity. They value emotional safety above almost everything. And when they find those qualities, they become incredibly devoted and generous in their relationships. But until then, they exist in a kind of quiet in-between state. They don't seek chaos, they don't chase crowds, they don't invest in shallow connections. They move carefully, choosing who gets access to their inner world, not out of arrogance, but because they understand the cost of letting someone in. There's also something quietly poetic about them. They feel deeply. They think expansively. They find meaning where others don't look. They're comfortable in silence. They appreciate simplicity. They process before reacting. While the world often rewards loudness, they are guided by depth. And if you spend time with someone like this, you'll notice something subtle. They experience life more slowly and emotionally. They feel before they express. They reflect before they respond. They internalize before they engage. And fast-paced social environments can overwhelm that rhythm. It's like asking an artist to rush a masterpiece. Possible, but unnatural. And their rhythm matters. Everyone moves through life at a different emotional pace. Some thrive in speed, others need space. People who think they dislike others are often simply people who move more slowly inside. When forced into faster environments, they lose balance. When allowed to move at their own pace, they thrive. Another key piece of this psychology lies in how they experience emotion. Many are deeply empathetic, but not in an obvious way. Their empathy is quiet, internal, almost invisible. They feel other people's emotions as if they were their own, and because empathy requires energy, feeling too much becomes draining. It's not people they avoid, it's emotional overload. So they create boundaries that look like distance. They protect their energy. They choose carefully where to focus. They step back when they feel full. This isn't rejection, it's regulation. But here's the irony: the more they protect themselves, the more misunderstood they become. Others may see them as cold or detached, but in reality, they feel too much, not too little. Their depth isn't always visible because they don't express it loudly, and the world often overlooks what is quiet. But quiet doesn't mean empty, it means full, just not noisy. Their silence isn't absence, it's depth without display. Their distance isn't rejection, it's self connection. And underneath all of this, there is still a quiet hope. A hope that one day, connection won't feel like something they have to defend against. A hope that they'll meet people who bring calm instead of pressure. That closeness will feel warm instead of demanding. That someone will understand that their silence is trust, not withdrawal. That their distance is care, not disinterest. That their solitude is healing, not rejection. Because the truth is, they don't want to stay behind emotional walls forever. They just want someone who approaches gently, someone patient, someone steady, someone who doesn't rush their openness, someone who understands that their heart is careful, not closed. And when the right connection finally appears, something begins to change. The world feels quieter, conversations feel lighter, emotions feel less heavy. They laugh more, they speak more freely, they share more honestly. Their inner world, once guarded, becomes something they're willing to let another person see. And that's the real psychology behind people who say they don't like people. It's not rejection, it's longing for the right kind of connection. It's not emotional coldness, it's sensitivity. It's not distance, it's protection. It's not judgment, it's discernment. And if more people understood this, fewer individuals would feel the need to hide behind distance. They wouldn't be labeled as distant or unfriendly, they would be seen for what they truly are: thoughtful, sensitive, perceptive. People trying to navigate a world that often feels too loud, too fast, and too overwhelming for their inner rhythm. Because deep down, even the most distant person carries a simple desire: to be understood without over explaining, to be accepted without performing, to be cared for without exhaustion, to feel close without losing themselves. And when they finally experience that, when someone shows them that connection can be calm, safe, and real, something shifts. They realize they never truly disliked people. They were just waiting for the right ones. Don't forget subscribe, like the video, and turn on notifications.